Part 1. The auction nobody questioned, 700 words. The town square was louder than usual. That morning dust rose in soft clouds beneath the boots of gathered townsfolk, swirling lazily in the golden sunlight. Wooden stalls lined the edges of the square, but today no one paid much attention to them. All eyes were fixed on the raised platform at the center, a place usually reserved for announcements, but now repurposed for something far more unsettling. A man stood there. His hands were bound loosely in front of him, though it hardly seemed necessary. He wasn't struggling, he wasn't shouting. He simply stood, still as stone, his posture straight, his gaze distant yet alert. People whispered, "Savage." One man muttered under his breath, "Doesn't even look right," another added, "Probably. Doesn't understand a word we're saying." Their words carried easily through the dry air, but the man on the platform didn't react. If he heard them, he gave no sign. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, something guarded. The auctioneer, a loud and broad man with a voice made for commanding crowds, stepped forward with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right, folks," he called out, clapping his hands together. "Let's get started." A few people chuckled. Others leaned in with curiosity. The man on the platform shifted slightly as the auctioneer circled him like he was inspecting livestock. "Strong build," the auctioneer announced. "Healthy, quiet type. Might not talk much, but I'd say that's a benefit, wouldn't you?" A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Still, the man said nothing. "Now then," the auctioneer continued, raising his hand dramatically, "who'll start the bidding?" There was a pause, a long one, not because people felt uncomfortable, but because they were unsure of his value. To them, he was unfamiliar, different, a risk. Then, from the back of the crowd, a hesitant voice called out, $10. The auctioneer nodded. 10. Do I hear 15? Another voice chimed in. 15. The numbers climbed slowly, without enthusiasm. This wasn't excitement. It was calculation, practicality, ownership, stripped of humanity. And then, stop. The word cut through the noise like a sharp wind. Heads turned. The crowd parted slightly as a young woman stepped forward. She wasn't dressed like the others. Her clothes were simple but well kept, her posture composed, her presence different. There was something steady about her, something certain. She moved closer to the platform, her eyes fixed not on the auctioneer but on the man standing above. For a brief moment, their gazes met. And something shifted. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Miss, if you're here to bid, you'll have to—" "Don't hurt him," she said. Her voice calm but firm. A murmur spread instantly through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked, confused. "Hurt him?" "No one's hurting. I'll buy him." Silence. Not the casual quiet of curiosity, but the heavy, stunned kind that settles when something unexpected changes the air itself. The auctioneer stared at her. "Well, that's fine, miss, but we're in the middle of—" "I'll pay more," she added, her tone unwavering. Now the crowd reacted. "Is she serious? Why him? What does she want with a man like that?" But she didn't look at them. She didn't acknowledge a single whisper. Her attention remained on him. The man on the platform had finally changed, just slightly. His head tilted, his eyes narrowing ever so faintly as if trying to understand her. Not her words, but her intention. Because it didn't match anything he'd seen before. There was no mockery in her gaze. No fear. No claim of power, just something quiet, something human. The auctioneer hesitated, sensing the shift in energy. "All right then," he said slowly. "Do I hear a higher bid?" No one spoke. Not this time. The earlier interest had vanished, replaced by confusion and unease. Whatever this moment was becoming, they didn't want to be part of it. The auctioneer nodded. "Sold." The word landed heavily. Just like that. It was done, but as the crowd began to disperse, whispering louder than before, the woman stepped closer to the platform. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply stood there, looking up at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, softly, almost gently, she said, "You're safe now." The man didn't respond. But for the first time since he had been brought to that platform, The guarded look in his eyes shifted, not gone, but changed. As if, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't entirely alone. The walk from the town square to her home felt longer than it should have. Not because of the distance, but because of the silence that followed them. People watched. They always did in a small town like this, but today their stares carried something sharper: curiosity, judgment, confusion. Some stood in doorways. Others paused mid-conversation, all of them tracking the unusual pair as they passed, a well-mannered young woman, and the man they had just seen on that platform. Why him? Someone whispered. She's made a mistake, another voice muttered. But she didn't slow down. She didn't respond. Her steps remained steady, her chin slightly raised, not in pride, but in quiet resolve. Behind her he followed, not forced, not pulled, just walking. There were no chains now, no ropes. The only thing binding him to her in that moment was choice, or perhaps uncertainty. He could have run. Anyone watching could see that. And maybe that's what unsettled them the most. When they finally reached her home, she paused at the wooden gate and pushed it open with a soft creak. It was a modest place, nothing grand, but warm. A small garden stretched along one side, with wildflowers growing freely as if no one had the heart to control them. She stepped inside, then turned slightly. You can come in, she said gently. He didn't move at first. His eyes scanned the space, the open doorway, the windows, the quiet stillness of it all. No shouting, no commands, no crowd pressing in, just calm. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped through the gate. Inside, everything felt different. The air carried the faint scent of herbs and fresh bread. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, painting soft patterns across the wooden floor. It didn't feel like a place of control. It felt like a place someone lived in. She walked ahead, setting a small cloth bag down on the table before turning back to him. You don't have to stand there, she said. You can sit if you want. He remained still. Not out of defiance, but because the words didn't fit the world he knew. You can, she gestured toward a chair. After a moment, he moved. Slowly, carefully, as though expecting something to change, like the offer might be taken back. But it wasn't. He sat. The chair creaked softly beneath his weight, the sound oddly loud in the quiet room. She nodded once, almost to herself, then moved toward a nearby shelf. From it, she took a folded set of clothes and placed them gently on the table in front of him. These are for you, she said. They're clean. His gaze dropped to the fabric, new, untorn, not something handed down carelessly or thrown aside. For a long moment, he didn't touch them. You can change in there, she added, pointing toward a small side room. I'll be outside. Again, no demand, just an option. She turned and stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was different from before. Not heavy, not suffocating, just open. He looked around the room once more, slower this time, taking in the details, the untouched surfaces, the careful placement of things. Nothing here felt rushed or careless. Nothing here felt like a place meant to break someone. Finally, his hand moved. He reached for the clothes. The fabric was soft, beneath his fingers foreign almost. He held it for a moment, as if trying to understand what it meant, before standing and walking toward the side room. Outside she waited, not impatiently, not nervously, just quietly. She sat on the wooden step near the door, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her gaze drifting toward the garden. A soft breeze moved through the flowers, carrying a sense of calm that the town square had completely lacked. Minutes passed, then the door opened. She looked up. For a brief second, she didn't say anything. He stood there, wearing the clean clothes. They fit simply, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to change the way he looked in the world. Less like someone labeled, more like someone seen. Their eyes met again. This time there was no crowd. No voices, no judgment echoing around them. Just two people standing in the quiet space between strangers and something else. You can eat when you're ready, she said softly, gesturing toward the table inside. There's food, he didn't respond. But he didn't look away either. And though the distance between them hadn't changed, something else had. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. Small, fragile, and real. The house settled into a quiet rhythm over the next few days. Not the kind filled with conversation or laughter, but a softer kind. The kind that grows when two people share a space without knowing how to share words. He moved carefully through the home, as if every step required permission. Not because she demanded it, but because he had never known a place where he didn't have to ask. She noticed everything. The way he stayed near the walls, never the center of a room. The way he finished whatever food was given to him slowly, as though expecting it might be taken away at any moment. The way his eyes followed her movements, not with suspicion, but with quiet awareness. And still, he didn't speak, but she didn't push. Each morning, she would prepare food and set it on the table between them. Not placing it directly in front of him, not watching him too closely. Just leaving it there like an offering. Not in order. You can eat, she would say gently. Sometimes he would nod. Sometimes he wouldn't, but he always waited until she sat down too. It became a silent agreement between them. She spoke often, though not expecting answers. She talked about small things. The weather. The way the wind sounded different at night. The garden outside and how it refused to grow in neat lines. "I tried once," she said one afternoon, kneeling by the window as sunlight spilled in. "But they didn't like it. The flowers, they just grew how they wanted anyway." She glanced over her shoulder at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "I suppose that's not such a bad thing." He was sitting nearby, his posture relaxed but only slightly. His hands rested on his knees, his gaze lowered. Yet there was a subtle shift in him now. He listened, really listened. Even if he didn't show it the way others might. At night the silence deepened. The house would grow still, the soft sounds of the outside world filtering in the wind, brushing against the walls, distant night creatures moving unseen. He didn't sleep easily. She could tell. More than once she had stepped quietly into the main room to find him sitting awake, his back against the wall, his eyes open in the dim light, watching, always watching. "You can rest," she said softly one night, careful not to startle him. He looked at her, but said nothing. She hesitated, then added, "You're safe here." The words hung in the air, simple, but unfamiliar. He didn't answer, not with words. But something in his shoulders eased, just slightly, and for now, that was enough. Days passed like that. Slow, gentle, unforced, until one evening, something changed. She was sitting at the table, mending a small tear in a piece of cloth. The light from the window had begun to fade, painting the room in soft shades of gold and shadow. He stood near the doorway, watching her, as he often did. But this time there was something different in his stance, less guarded, less distant. She didn't look up immediately. "I think it'll rain tonight," she said casually, threading the needle again. "The air feels heavier." Silence followed, then rain. The word was quiet, rough, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. Her hand stilled. For a moment she didn't move at all, almost as if she feared reacting too quickly might break whatever fragile moment had just formed. Slowly she looked up. He was still standing there, still watching. But now there was something else in his expression, uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure what would happen next. She smiled, not wide, not overwhelming, just enough. "Yes," she said softly, "rain." The word settled between them, no longer empty, shared. He didn't speak again that night. But he didn't need to. Because something important had already happened. A wall, invisible but heavy, had shifted. Not fallen, not yet, but cracked. And through that small opening, something new had begun to grow. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It never did. It came like this, in quiet moments, in single words, in the space between fear and hope. And as the first drops of rain began to fall softly against the roof that night, filling the silence with a gentle rhythm, neither of them felt quite as alone as before. The rain lingered into the next morning. Soft at first, then steady like a quiet presence that refused to Leave, water traced gentle paths down the windows, blurring the outside world into muted shades of gray and green. Inside, the house felt warmer, safer. He stood near the window, watching the rain fall. There was something familiar in the way he observed it, not just seeing, but remembering, she noticed. "You've seen storms like this before," she said, softly from across the room. It wasn't a question. He didn't turn right away. His gaze remained fixed outside, following the rhythm of the falling drops. For a moment, it seemed like he might retreat again into silence. But then, yes, the word came more easily this time. She set aside the cup she was holding and leaned slightly against the table, careful not to move too quickly. "Where?" she asked gently, a pause, not empty but full, as if he were choosing what to give and what to keep. "Far," he said at last. It wasn't much, but it was something, and she understood. "You don't have to tell me everything," she replied. "Just what you want to." He turned then, slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was less distance in them now. Still guarded, still careful, but no longer closed. For the first time, he walked toward her without hesitation. Each step was steady, deliberate, not cautious, not unsure. Just, He stopped a few feet away, close enough that the silence between them felt different than before, less like a barrier, more like a space waiting to be filled. "They called me things," he said, his voice low. "Names." Her expression softened. "I know," she said quietly. "Said I was less?" he continued, "not like them." The words came slowly, unevenly, as though each one had to be pulled from somewhere deep and hidden. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush him, just listened. He looked down at his hands briefly, then back at her. "I stopped speaking," he added, easier that way. The honesty in his voice carried no anger, only a kind of quiet acceptance that had been built over time, something learned. Something endured. She took a small step closer. Not enough to overwhelm, just enough to show she was still there. "You're not less," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "You never were." He held her gaze, searching it not for the words themselves, but for the truth behind them, because words had been used against him before. Words had labeled him, defined him, reduced him, but this felt different. There was no force in her voice, no attempt to convince, just belief, simple and unwavering. "They don't know. You," she continued. "They saw something they didn't understand, and gave it a name to make it easier." He frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in thought. "Savage," he said quietly. The word hung in the air, heavy with everything it had carried. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "That's not who you are." Silence followed again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. He looked toward the window once more, watching the rain as if it might offer him answers. Then, after a moment, he spoke again, "My name." He began, hesitating. She waited. "Is Cale?" It was the first time he had offered something that belonged only to him. Not a label. Not a title, but a name. She smiled softly. "Cale," she repeated carefully, respectfully. "It's good to know." Something shifted in his expression, then subtle but real, as if hearing his name spoken without judgment, without mockery, gave it new meaning, gave it weight again. For so long it had been buried beneath everything else, forgotten or ignored. But here it mattered. "I'm glad you told me," she added. He nodded once. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, filling the quiet with a soft, constant sound. But inside, something had changed. He wasn't just the man from the platform anymore. Not just the one people whispered about. Not just the label they had given him. He was Cale, a man with a past. A man with a voice quiet but returning. And as he stood there, no longer hidden behind silence, she realized something deeply important. She hadn't saved a broken man. She had simply given space for a whole one to be seen. By the time the rain finally passed, something in the house had changed. It wasn't obvious at first glance. The same wooden floors, the same quiet rooms, the same soft light slipping through the windows each morning. But beneath it all there was a new rhythm forming, one that didn't rely on silence alone. Cale was no longer just a presence in the home, he was becoming part of it. It started with small things. One morning, she woke to find the loose hinge on the garden gate repaired. She hadn't mentioned it, but he had noticed. The wood now sat straight, firm, moving smoothly. When she pushed it open, she ran her fingers lightly along the edge, then glanced back toward the house. He was standing near the doorway, watching, not for praise, but for reaction. "It's perfect," she said. A soft smile forming, he didn't respond with words, but he gave a small nod. That was enough. From then on, it became something unspoken between them. He fixed what needed fixing, carried what needed carrying, quietly, without announcement. And she let him, not as a command, but as trust, inside the house. The distance between them continued to fade. They shared meals at the same table now, not across from each other like strangers, but closer, sometimes side by side. She still spoke more, but now, occasionally, he would answer, short sentences, simple words, but each one mattered. "You like it?" she asked one evening, placing a plate in front of him. He studied the food briefly before replying, "Yes." It wasn't much, but it was real, and she never pushed for more outside their home. However, the world hadn't changed at all. The town still whispered, they always would. "She's letting him roam freely now," one woman muttered near the well. "It's not right," another replied. "A man like that, living under her roof." "He'll leave eventually," someone else added, "or worse." Their words carried through the air, meant to be overheard. Sometimes she heard them, sometimes Cale did, but neither of them reacted. The way the town expected, she didn't argue, didn't defend, because she knew. Something they weren't seeing him, they were seeing their own fear. One afternoon, as she returned from the market, she noticed him standing near the edge of the property. His posture was still, his gaze fixed on the distant town. For a moment he looked apart, not from her, but from everything else. "You can go there, you know," she said as she approached. He didn't turn immediately. "They don't want me." "There," he replied quietly. She stepped beside him, following his gaze. "Maybe not," she said. "But that doesn't decide who you are?" He looked at her then, something unreadable in his expression. "I don't belong there." He added, the words weren't bitter, just certain. She nodded slowly. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But you belong somewhere." A pause, then she added, softer this time, "You belong here, if you want to." The wind moved gently between them, carrying the scent of earth and sun-warmed grass. For a long moment he didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. And that too was an answer. That evening they sat outside as the sky shifted into shades of gold and amber. The world felt quieter at that hour, as if even the town had softened its voice. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting on the wooden step. "It's strange," she said thoughtfully, "how people decide who someone is, without ever really knowing them." Cale sat beside her, his arms resting loosely over his knees. "They see what they want," he said. She glanced at him, surprised not by the words, but by how easily they came. "Yes," she agreed. "But that doesn't make it true." He was quiet again after that, but not withdrawn, just thinking. The sky darkened slowly, stars beginning to appear one by one. A calm settled over everything, the kind that didn't need to be filled. After a while he spoke again. "You saw different." She turned her head slightly. "I saw you," she said, simple, uncomplicated, true. He didn't reply, but something in his expression softened, in a way she hadn't seen before, not guarded, not distant, just present. And as the night wrapped gently around them, it became clear what they were building didn't need the town's understanding. It didn't need approval, because some bonds weren't meant to be explained, only lived. Morning arrived gently, wrapped in soft light and the quiet promise of another calm day. The air felt different. Not in a way that could be easily named, but something had shifted again, subtle and steady, like the turning of a page no one noticed until it was already halfway done. She stood in the small kitchen, arranging breakfast as she usually did. The familiar routine had become a comfort, placing 2 plates on the table, pouring water into simple cups, leaving space rather than filling it. Behind her she heard movement, not cautious, not hesitant, just natural. Cale stepped into the room, his presence no longer lingering at the edges. He moved with quiet confidence now, as if the house had begun to recognize him and he in turn had begun to accept it. "Morning," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder. He paused for a brief moment, as if still getting used to the word. "Morning," he replied. It was simple, but it mattered. She smiled faintly and turned back to the table. "I tried something different today," she added, gesturing toward the plate. "It might not be perfect." Cale sat down across from her, studying the food with mild curiosity. "Nothing has to be perfect," he said. The words came without strain, without hesitation. She looked up, slightly surprised, not at what he said, but how easily he said it. "You're right," she replied. "It doesn't." They ate in a comfortable quiet, the kind that no longer felt empty. Outside, the world carried on as it always did, distant sounds of the town, the soft rustling of leaves, the occasional breeze brushing past the windows. But inside, there was something steady, something growing. After breakfast, she stepped out into the garden, kneeling beside a cluster of flowers that had begun to lean unevenly. She gently adjusted the soil around them, brushing her fingers lightly against their stems. "They never listen to me," she said with a small laugh. "I try to guide them, but they always choose their own way." Cale stood nearby, watching. "They're strong," he said. She glanced up at him. "Or stubborn," he considered that for a moment. Both," he answered. She laughed softly, the sound light and unguarded. The moment lingered. Then, as she reached to adjust one of the flowers again, her hand slipped slightly in the loose soil. It wasn't anything serious, just enough to catch her off balance for a second. "Oh," she started, steadying herself quickly. Cale stepped forward instinctively, his hand lifting as if to help, but stopping just short when he saw she was fine. "I'm all right," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. There was a pause, and then something unexpected happened. Cale let out the faintest breath of sound, not quite a laugh, but close. So close that it surprised even him. She looked up at him immediately, and there it was. A smile, small, uncertain, as if it didn't fully know how to exist yet, but real. Completely real. For a moment neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold still around that single expression, as if even the breeze had paused to witness it. "You smiled," she said softly, almost as if saying it too loudly might make it disappear. Cale's expression shifted slightly, the unfamiliar feeling still settling on his face. "I did," he admitted. There was something almost hesitant in his voice, not regret, but unfamiliarity, as though the act itself was something he hadn't allowed himself in a very long time. "It suits you," she said gently. He looked at her, searching her expression again, not out of doubt this time, but curiosity. "You smile often," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "I suppose I do. Why?" The question was simple, but sincere. She thought for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes it reminds me that things can be good," she said, "even if they weren't before." Cale absorbed that quietly. The words didn't rush through him. They settled, slowly, finding their place. "Good," he repeated. She nodded. "Yes, good." The silence returned again, but it felt different now, lighter, easier, as if something that had once been locked away had finally found its way back into the open. Cale glanced toward the garden, then back at her. And though the smile faded from his face, it didn't disappear completely. It remained, just beneath the surface, waiting, because now, for the first time in a long while, he knew it was still there. And as she returned to tending the flowers, a quiet thought settled between them, unspoken but understood. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came like this, in small moments, in unexpected smiles, in the gentle realization that something once lost had begun to return. The days had grown warmer, the kind of warmth that settled into thee and stayed there, softening everything it touched. The garden was fuller now, colors stretching wider, stronger, just like the quiet life growing inside the small Home, inside, things no longer felt uncertain. They felt shared. Cale moved through the space as if it belonged to him, not in ownership, but in comfort. He no longer paused at doorways or hesitated before sitting. His presence had become natural, woven into the rhythm of each day. And yet, there was something she had been thinking about. Something she had delayed, not out of fear, but because she wanted to be sure the moment was right. That morning she found him outside, repairing a small wooden bench near the garden. His movements were steady, focused. The sunlight caught along his shoulders, and for a moment she simply watched. Not as someone observing a stranger, but as someone who knew him. "Cale," she said gently. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "There's something I need to give you." He set the tool aside, sensing the change in her tone. There was no urgency, but there was meaning. She stepped closer, holding something small in her hand, a folded paper. He looked at it, then back at her. "What is it?" he asked. She took a quiet breath before answering. "Your freedom." The words settled between them, heavier than anything she had said before. For a moment, Cale didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes dropped slowly to the paper in her hand, then back to her face as if trying to understand what she meant, not just the words, but everything behind them. "No one owns you," she continued softly. "Not before and not now. What happened in that town, it doesn't define you." She held the paper out toward him. "This makes it official. If anyone ever questions it, you can show them." He stared at it, unmoving. Freedom, the word itself felt distant, strange, like something he had heard before, but never truly held. "You're free to go wherever you want," she added. "Stay here, leave, choose your own path." The air grew still. Even the soft sounds of the garden seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was waiting for his answer. Slowly, Cale reached out. His fingers brushed against the paper, but he didn't take it right away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked. "Why?" he asked. The question wasn't sharp, it wasn't defensive, it was honest. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because it's yours," she said simply. "It always was." He held her, eyes for a long moment, searching for anything that might feel hidden, but there was nothing, no expectation, no condition. No fear of losing him, just truth. Finally, he took the paper. The movement was slow, deliberate, like accepting something far greater than the object itself. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the words. He didn't rush. He let each line settle, let its meaning sink in. Proof, choice, release. When he finished, his hands lowered slightly, the paper still held between his fingers. "You would let me go," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "If that's what you want." Silence followed, not tense, but full, because now, for the first time, everything stood open before him. The road beyond the garden, the distant hills. The unknown. He could walk away. No one would stop him. No one would follow. No one would claim him again. Cale turned, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. The world stretched wide, untouched, waiting. For a moment it called to him, not with force, but with possibility. Then he looked back. At the house, at the garden, at her. The place where he had been seen. He stepped forward, not away, but closer. The paper remained in his hand, but now it felt different, not like an escape, but like a choice he no longer needed to fear. "I stay," he said. The words were steady, certain. She didn't speak immediately, didn't rush to respond, because she understood what that meant. Not obligation, not debt, not gratitude, choice. "You don't have to," she said gently, "just to be sure." "I know," he replied. And that made all the difference. A soft breeze moved through the garden, carrying the warmth of the day with it. The flowers swayed lightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Cale folded the paper again, holding it loosely now. Not as something to cling to, but as something that no longer controlled him. "I stay," he repeated, quieter this time. And as she looked at him, she realized something profound. Freedom hadn't taken him away. It had brought him closer. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't staying because he had no choice. He was staying Because he finally did. Time move forward the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. The days blended into one another, not in a way that felt repetitive, but in a way that felt steady, predictable in the best sense, safe. The small house at the edge of town no longer felt like a place divided between two strangers. It felt like a home. Cale's presence was no longer something people whispered about with confusion. It became something they couldn't quite ignore anymore. Not because he forced himself into the world, but because the world slowly began to notice what had always been there. A man who worked quietly, who spoke only when needed, who carried himself not with anger, but with calm certainty. And beside him a woman who had never once treated him as anything less than equal. The town didn't change all at once. It never does, but small things began to shift. A nod from a passerby, a greeting that wasn't laced with judgment, a moment of hesitation before someone chose silence instead of whispering. It wasn't acceptance. Not fully, but it was less resistance. And sometimes that's where change begins. One evening, as the sun dipped low across the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and fading amber, she stood in the garden, watching the light stretch across the flowers had grown wild again, untamed, beautiful, exactly as they wanted to be, just like she had always allowed them. You were right, she said softly, not turning. Cale stepped up beside her. About what? He asked. The flowers, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. They were never meant to grow in lines. He glanced over the garden, then back at her. Neither are people, he said. She let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh. No, she agreed, they're not. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the day slowly give way to night. It was the kind of silence they had grown into, not empty, not uncertain. Just shared. I used to think I understood everything, she admitted after a while. How the world worked? Where people belonged? Cale didn't interrupt. He rarely did. But I was wrong, she continued. I saw things the way I was taught to see them. Not the way they really were. She turned slightly, looking at him now, until that day. He met her gaze, his expression calm. You saw me, he said. It wasn't a question, she nodded. I tried to, she corrected gently. But I didn't know what I'd find. A small pause, or what I needed, she added quietly. The words hung between them, soft but meaningful. Cale studied her face as if weighing something deeper than the conversation itself. You changed. Things, he said. She shook her head lightly. No, she replied. We did. Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Full. Complete. As if nothing needed to be added to it. The sky darkened further, the first stars beginning to appear, scattered gently across the horizon. The air cooled, carrying with it the quiet peace of night. After a moment, she spoke again. They said I was saving you, she said, her voice thoughtful. That I was foolish for it. Cale's gaze didn't shift. They were wrong, he said. She smiled faintly. Yes, she said. They were... He looked toward the horizon for a moment, then back at her. You gave me space, he said slowly. To be who I already was? She listened, her expression softening. And you... He paused, choosing his words carefully, reminded me that I could. The simplicity of it carried more weight than anything else, because it was true. She hadn't changed who he was, she had just seen him. And in return, he had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing. Clarity. Honesty. A different way of understanding the world. And the people in it. I thought I was helping you, she said quietly. Cale's expression softened slightly. You did, he replied, then, after a small pause, and you helped yourself. She let out a soft breath, her eyes drifting back toward the sky. Maybe that was the truth she had been slowly discovering all along, that saving someone wasn't about changing them. It was about seeing them clearly and allowing them to stand as they are. And sometimes in doing that, you find something in yourself that needed saving too. The night settled fully around them, calm and endless. The house behind them stood quiet and warm, a place built not on ownership or expectation, but on trust. On choice, on something far deeper than either of them had known before. And as they stood there, side by side, beneath a sky that asked nothing of them, one truth remained, simple and certain. He had always been a man worth saving. And in the end they had both found something worth keeping.